Afternoon. I want to thank you all for joining us for this wonderful event. My name is Jan Schimmick. I'm the interim president of the University of Tennessee, and I'm very pleased that our Howard Baker Center for Public Policy is a co-sponsor of this summit. We look forward to an excellent discussion this afternoon. It's my privilege to introduce our panelists and to try to keep us on time. I will note at the top of this that two of the panels, including myself, are archaeologists, so time is meaningless to us. You have the panelists' full biographies, and their distinguished careers are clear in those biographies. In the interest of preserving a little time to hear from them, I'll give an abbreviated summary of their achievements. Our first speaker is Charles Chad Holliday. Mr. Holliday is chairman of the board of directors of Bank of America. He formerly served as chairman of the board of directors of DuPont for 10 years. Mr. Holliday joined DuPont as an engineer in 1970 and held various positions throughout his tenure there, including serving as the company's chief executive officer from 1998 until 2008. Since 2007, Mr. Holliday has served as a member of the board of directors of Deere and Company and as a member of the board's audit and corporate governance committees. He's also chairman emeritus of Catalyst, a leading nonprofit organization dedicated to expanding opportunities for women in business, and chairman emeritus of the board of the U.S. Council on Competitiveness, a nonpartisan, non-governmental organization working to ensure America's prosperity. Mr. Holliday is a founding member of the International Business Council and a member of the National Academy of Engineering. He also previously served as chairman of the Business Roundtable's Task Force for Environment, Technology, and Economy, the World Business Council for Sustainable Development, the Business Council itself, and the American section of the Society for Chemical Industry. On a personal note, I'm proud to note that Mr. Holliday received his bachelor's degree in industrial engineering from the University of Tennessee at Knoxville. He has received honorary doctorates from Polytechnic University in Brooklyn and from Washington College in Chesterton, Meriden. It's my great pleasure to introduce Chad Holliday.
Thanks very much. Good afternoon. Thanks very much for being here. I'd like to first say this has been an outstanding session. I've learned a lot from this morning. I just want to tell you about an escalator ride I had. It's much lower key than some of the stuff you've heard. But in this building, October of last year, I was going down the escalator and my cell phone rings, and on the other end of the phone is Hal Harvey, who runs a foundation called Climate Works. And he says, we've been dealing with this energy work, this climate issue. I finally got it. We've been going about this the wrong way. If we could make really cheap, really clean energy, we wouldn't have to worry about anything else. Everybody would just use it. I said, great epiphany, Hal. About the end of my escalator. Do you have a way to get that? He said, we will put together a group of very successful business people and create a business plan for that in a very different way than we ever have before. I said, great, who do you have? He said, if you say yes, I'll have my first one. True story. So I get to the bottom and I say, who else do you want? And he said, well, I'm going to get Bill Gates. I said, okay, you get Bill Gates, you got me too. We're set. So we put together a group of people. Bill Gates, who's head of some luck at software, a guy named John Doerr, who's invested in some of the most successful companies in the venture capital arena, Jeff Immelt from General Electric, who's had their share of successful investments, Ursula Burns from Xerox, they don't call it the Xerox machine for nothing, Norm Augustine with great military accomplishments at Lockheed Martin before the work he's done, serving the economy here, and Tim Solsa from Cummins. If you look at what Cummins has done about transforming the diesel engine, it's really a step change. And so we came together last November, and we said we're going to create a business plan for creating that really cheap, really clean energy like we would do it inside our own company. And we tried to take the benefit of those 7 companies that came together, and then we pulled together over 100 professionals who studied this subject before, and we said we want to get it done really fast. And so we had it done last June. I'd like to tell you simply what the elements are of that and where we stand, because we're quite hopeful that this long-range plan could really make a difference. So 5 recommendations. First was we looked at how are we going about trying to create this really cheap, really clean energy, and we're not organized to do it. We don't have continuity through administrations. We don't have continuity through technologies. And so we said recommendation 1 must be an energy strategy board that's non-political. Obviously reports to Congress and the administration, but is responsive to a long-term plan, because we do think it will take a decade or 2. We're not unrealistic about how long it may take to make this happen. The second we looked at is, are we funding this to win? And when we calculate, I know Steve Keenan had some slightly higher numbers this morning, we calculate about $5 billion that's currently being spent on energy research. We think a minimum is $16 billion per year. And we believe we need a commitment for at least 10 years of that. And quite frankly, as we get to the latter stages, we think it'll probably take more. But this is a very small investment about what a change could make. And in our recommendations, this is a report, American Energy Innovation Council is our name. We created that 2 weeks before we came out. We forgot to name ourselves till right at the end. So, the website has all the information on it. If you're not going to fund it that way, forget the other stuff, because you're kind of wasting your time if you're not going to put serious funding behind that. And that would be matched with a lot of private money to make that work. The third recommendation is looking at what's been very successful in this country is technology clusters. And we were very careful in our recommendations not to say what the technology should be or that they all should be at Oak Ridge in Knoxville, Tennessee, although that was an option, you know. But clearly, we thought that is a model. We quite frankly focus more on research universities that you would center that around, but if a national labs could fit it in the equation, that would be good too. We just had extremely good experience among the 7 of us about research universities being the center for this kind of change. We believe it will take around $200 million a year of federal funding for each one of these clusters. And we vision maybe 3 or 4 clusters in the country that would be competitively set up. And again, that money would all come out of our $11 billion extra we had. The fourth recommendation was around ARPA-E. Steve Koonin this morning mentioned ARPA-E. It is a very impressive program. I was just out 3 weeks ago and sat with the team, and they reviewed their items. And what you came across as they reviewed each item, if you can make that happen, you'll hit that goal of really clean, really cheap. And every one, if you were going to bet your life savings on it, I'd question that. Yeah, each one, probability of success now, 10, 20% the most, but each one having the potential that was big. And that's what we thought was critical about ARPA-E, and the 37 projects they're funding today are like that. But they funded about 1% of their proposals. And they did that with about $300 million per year. Our recommendation is $1 billion. We thought that was about right. About 3 times as many would be about the right number of individual projects to fund. And our fifth recommendation, and if you had to say what's the most critical, where we spent the most time on it, it was the fifth recommendation, which is how do you take this technology and really make it commercial? And that's where we've seen so many times we get stalled along the way. That's what we've seen it in our own experience inside the 7 companies that were involved. And so we had a very specific proposal I won't take you through now, where it's private industry who's going to take it the rest of the way in a handoff and a relay with the government in a very appropriate way. And this energy board I described in recommendation 1 would make that happen. So we launched our recommendations. We got a meeting with President Obama and his key staff. It was an engaging hour discussion. They were very interested. The commitment was, he said, I'm going to read this tonight, and all my staff will too. They kind of frowned. He smiled, so that's the way it kind of worked out. It's only 32 pages. We wrote it like a business plan. It's thought of that way. There are a lot of unanswered questions, but I think it gives you the outline of what it is. And we're testifying tomorrow before a House committee, trying to root for the funding, and not just the funding, but the overall plan. Thanks very much for the opportunity to share it with you.
Thank you, Ted. Our second panelist is Deborah Win Smith. Ms. Win Smith is President and CEO of the Council on Competitiveness. That organization brings CEOs, labor leaders, and university presidents together to ensure that Americans prosper in the global economy. The Council was founded in 1986, and through its coalition of business, labor, and academia, recommends actionable public policy solutions. Ms. Win Smith is also a member of the Board of Directors of NASDAQ and serves on the Audit, Compensation, and Financing committees. She's also a member of the Oversight Board of the Internal Revenue Service, responsible for administering the nation's tax laws, and a member of the U.S. Department of State's Advisory Commission on International Economic Policy. Ms. Win Smith recently chaired the Secretary of Commerce's Advisory Committee on Strengthening Americans' Communities. She has served on 4 cabinet-level advisory groups, including the Secretary of Energy's Task Forces on the Future of Science and Nuclear Energy. She serves on the University of Chicago's Board of Governors for Argonne National Laboratory and was a long-standing member of the University of California President's Council on the National Laboratories, providing oversight for Los Alamos, Lawrence Livermore, and Lawrence Berkeley National Laboratories. She also serves on the board of directors at the Albert Shanker Institute and the U.S. Naval Academy Foundation. She earned a Bachelor of Arts degree, magna cum laude, from Vassar College, and a master's degree in, yes, classical archaeology from King's College at the University of Cambridge. She received an honorary Doctor of Humanities degree from Michigan State University in 2006. It's my great pleasure to introduce Deborah Win Smith.
Thank you very much. Well, Jen, I'm delighted to be here, too, and I want to thank Kent Hughes and the Baker Institute and Woodrow Wilson for convening this. Back in 2005, the Council on Competitiveness, when Chad Holliday was our chairman, and we're thrilled he's our chairman emeritus and still so active with us, we did host a U.S.-EU Innovation Summit when Prime Minister Balkenende was the head of the EU. And so I'm delighted that many of the issues that you're addressing today and that we'll go through with this initiative are those that we've worked on. But, of course, the issues and challenges have changed. I'm just going to briefly kind of outline some thoughts around some global grand challenges and then, bring this back a little bit to the innovation capacity. And I think as everybody in the room knows, this is a very exciting time, but it is a time of great turbulence and transition and transformation across every front, whether it's the global economy, on the national security front, geopolitical tension, and then, actually the social fabric of life. So, in the midst of all this, we're also right in the middle of one of the greatest profound technological revolutions that we've known as human beings. And that's with this convergence of the digital biotechnology and nanotechnology world that, as we like to say at the Council on Competitiveness, that convergence of those three revolutions is really going to be rewriting the world in digital code, genetic code, and atomic code. And this just has, incredible ramifications for what's going to happen to existing businesses, new businesses. It's really a tremendous opportunity to address many of the grand global challenges that, we've been talking about today, from sustainable energy to others. One of the other issues, of course, is that most of these grand global challenges can't be dealt with by any one nation or region. They really require global consensus and collaboration. So that's another reason why conferences such as this are so important. I'm just going to highlight three of these challenges and really talk about them in how they are profoundly interconnected and integrative, and that they really have to be addressed as complex systems problems. And because of that, they really require a new model, both for cross-disciplinary science and technology research, but also how we work with the private sector and governments in our countries and globally for the end-use solution paths to these challenges. And, there are three that I'm going to just mention. They're the interconnection between food, water, and energy. And, again, as we know, this is the basis for human survival, for our health, for our progress, for environmental stewardship, and also for global security. And all three of these areas now are under tremendous stress. Just a couple little metrics here on food. With expected population increases, we may need to increase global food by 50% by 2030. Some are projecting 70% by 2050. Most of the world's arable land is already in use. Remaining land has serious soil and terrain constraints. We see food volatility and price in the developing world, food riots in more than 60 countries, and also, a very contentious debate in many public constituencies that is not science-driven around the potential of genetic engineering and its application to meeting food challenges. Of course, water, again, vital for life, agriculture, all industrial development, and much of the clean energy transformation. Today, 1 billion people don't have any access to safe drinking water, and by 2025, 2.8 billion people will be water scarce or stressed. By 2050, a third of the world's population may lack clean and secure sources of water. And again, the health issues, the pandemic issues that relate to water are just absolutely huge. Energy, we've been talking about that, I know, a lot of the day, but, at the center of the concern about climate change and the move to the low-carbon economy, is the balancing with soaring global energy consumption, billions of people, as we've already heard, stranded in energy poverty, No country has really been able to reduce poverty and raise living standards without energy. And so if you depend or deplete, some of the fundamental resources, there's just absolutely no economic development whatsoever, and tragedy. And, we've really seen that come clear so tragically in Haiti, where, as you know, the nation was totally deforested many years ago. And then, of course, in emerging economies where the global growth and consumer demand is just soaring, without access to affordable clean energy, they are going to increase their dependency on fossil fuels, increase pollution, environmental damage. So, when you look at all of that, and yes, there is some bright spot in terms of, we've heard earlier about some of the things that are going on in China and in India in driving some of this. Most pundits and experts are really looking at the world now kind of with a dark vision of scarcity, that we're in a time of great scarcity. And I just want to posit a few things to think about. If you look at a scarcity model, what you're going to see is a raise in an energy further as a lever in geopolitics. Energy will be, without question, a lever in geopolitics. We'll see nations pitting each other for the possession of resources, valuable resources. I mean, look what just happened in the last week with the issue between China and Japan on the rare earth minerals, and what that poses. Cycles of volatility, increases in prices for products and services higher than they would be in a free market, stalling of growth in these emerging economies, and then, tremendous slowdown in poverty reduction, the acceleration of health pandemics and things. So that's kind of, in my view, when you look at all of this in a scarcity model. But if you think of these challenges, food, water, energy, they cry out for innovation. And I think that because of that and how innovation really enables the future, we ought to try to look at the model from one of scarcity to sustainable abundance and growth that will enhance the quality of life and also address these problems. So here are a couple things I want to share with you. Look at biotechnology. Well, without biotechnology, we will not be able to boost the 4 F's of life: food, feed, fiber, and fuels. Already, biotechnology is enabling pest and disease-resistant crops to increase yields. Researchers are using biotech to increase nutrition in food. For the first time in history, it may be that made food stocks in Africa, such as sorghum, will have nutrients embedded in them, so people will have the protein and nutrients they need for a healthy life. And fish, of course, are also being developed in a very significant productivity way as well. So if you look at these drought and food-tolerant crops that are going to increase yields and establish agriculture where agriculture no longer exists, one of the things that is exciting is that the U.S. and Brazil are playing a very important role in leading this transformation. And that is something that we had the pleasure last week to host the second U.S.-Brazil Innovation Summit here in Washington, and to really understand the scale and the scope and what the Brazilians are doing in this radical transformation of agriculture with its linkage to water and energy is very, very exciting and positive. On the waterfront, nanotechnology, again, promises to revolutionize water purification and treatment with nanotube membranes for desalination and eliminating germs from water. And, Chad was mentioning ARPA-E. They have funded a fabulous company called NanoOasis that's developing carbon nanotubes to make industrial, scalable, reverse osmosis membranes that could transform desalination. Already they're showing in the business plan, 30 to 50% energy savings. And they could reduce the cost of water as much as 40%. And of course in India, many of you are aware of Tata's created the home water purifier that uses rice husks as part of the system for that. And then, looking at biomimicry. Countries are beginning to look at how people harvest clean water from fog. And fog harvesting systems can now produce 500 gallons of water a day, costing about $15,000 and lasting 10 years. And I was fascinated to learn that the basis for that was in studying how the shells of a desert beetle draw drinking water from fog. So it's a beautiful example of innovation that's now potentially going to be used as a basis to address a global challenge and also create abundance out of scarcity. And, on the energy, I won't spend too much time because we've talked so much about that already. But, it is a perfect storm for innovation. And, I can't, again, not resist mentioning ARPA-E, but, they've had already 3,700 concept paper in response to the first call for ideas. This is fantastic. And who knows what's going to come out of all of that. And when you think of the energy efficiency challenge, you know, it's our cleanest, cheapest source of energy. And the design and the architecture, all the things that are coming into that are really, again, going to provide tremendous value for reuse, recycling, and the better use of resources. You know, again, I want to draw out this theme of scarcity versus abundance. You know, I know some of our colleagues in Europe think Americans have too big cars, too big houses, too big refrigerators, but I'll just throw out the refrigerated data here. It's rather interesting. The average, and Steve, our Secretary of Energy, Dr. Chu, loves this. The average refrigerator in the United States today uses 3/4 less energy than in 1975, despite being 20% larger. And again, another wonderful little example that mimics nature and the spiral is this company called Pack Scientific that looked, of course, at the spiral in seashells and tornadoes and applied this geometry to rotary devices, fans, mixers, propellers, and turbines, with applications now that are increasing airflow by 15 to 30% with no increase in power. So again, these are all examples of innovation, creating abundance out of what could be seen as scarcity, and also addressing these grand global challenges. So, you know, if you think of sustainability in the long term, and we're talking here about science and technology, but, you know, there's clearly the policy arena as well. I really love the language that's emerging from very innovative thinkers about the blue economy, and not just thinking of, you know, doing the life cycle without leading waste, but actually how waste is used and how all resources are used to create new value and to add, as opposed to just keeping things at a status quo. And again, innovation is always, you know, at the heart of all of this. You know, when you look at the disciplines and the things we need, we talk a lot in the United States about multidisciplinary research, bringing together our universities, our industries, our labs. That's hard. It's difficult. You know, our universities, we talk about the State Department, our universities really are still organized in traditional stovepipe disciplines. And, you know, I know, Chad, I think you're leading a study now at the Academy that's addressing some of those things. So we need to look very creatively and differently how we organize to meet these challenges and problems. And also how we bring together the arts, the humanities, and the social scientists with the scientists and engineers. Because that is really where you get the creative thinking and looking at the world in different ways. You know, anthropologists, archaeologists have to be involved in a lot of this systemic systems thinking. And, you know, I can't help but bring in a little comment about the Mycenaeans and Minoans. But for those of you who may not know that great civilization, they had the first really sustainable air conditioning systems that were built into their architecture way before any of us even thought of that. So going forward, we do need a new global framework and sustainable framework for economic development that is really win-win and moves towards abundance and growth, and not just focuses on scarcity and constraint. And I do think we need to see a better partnership. This may be a little controversial for some of you in the room, but I think we need a better partnership between the scientific community and the economic and business community on some of the overall drivers that will enable us to succeed. You know, the scientists and engineers and all of us support more investment in R&D and big investment in R&D, but it's rare that you hear the scientific community come out and talk about the capital cost structure in our country and what this means for investment flows and what it means for where technology is actually deployed and scaled. And if we don't address some of those issues, we can spend a lot of the money on the advanced R&D here and in collaboration, but we will not see the economic benefit, the jobs, and the growth, and the next generation innovation as well. So the whole manufacturing piece of all of this is very important as well when you move to a world of sustainable abundance and growth. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Deborah. And our third speaker is Dr. Carol Corrado. She's the Senior Advisor and Research Director in Economics at the Conference Board. She works on measuring intangibles and studying their role in the innovation process and economic growth. Dr. Corrado previously was chief of the Industrial Output Section at the Federal Reserve Board, where she managed a research program that studied the drivers of productivity and technological change and worked to improve the measurement of industrial production and capacity utilization. Dr. Corrado co-organized a conference measuring capital in the new economy at the Federal Reserve Board in 2002, and those proceedings were published by the University of Chicago Press in 2005. She's also a member of the Executive Committee of the National Bureau of Economic Research's Conference on Research on Income and Wealth, and she's also a co-organizer of a regular workshop of the Conference on Research on Income and Wealth at the National Bureau of Economic Research's Summer Institute at Cambridge, Massachusetts. Dr. Corrado earned a PhD in economics from the University of Pennsylvania and a bachelor's degree in management science from Carnegie Mellon University.
Thank you. See, I have a PowerPoint, so we'll get back to some charts and pictures. Okay. So I am going to be, I'm an economist, and I like to study technology. I'm not going to talk about what I see in the prospects for technology. Rather, I'm going to talk about a couple projects that I've been involved in that have involved researchers in the U.S. and researchers on the EU side that have developed databases and a framework for analyzing productivity and technology. As a matter of fact, I'm here really, I live in Washington. I worked at the Federal Reserve for 30 years. Now I work for the Conference Board, but I'm actually here as an invitation of the EU. Pierre Villette suggested that I come. So I think, I'm a product of the collaboration. I think that this group wants to further in some other areas. So as an outline of my remarks, I'll just want to say for a minute or two what the Conference Board is. If you don't know, I'm going to just give you an overview of one of its products that grew out of a very well-known framework program of the EU. And then I'll spend most of my time talking about our work with EU researchers on intangible investment and capital and economic growth. And that is also an EU framework program called Co-Invest. Over there, they use acronyms just like we do. They tend to be a little longer, though, I guess. So that's the outline. So just real quick, what is the Conference Board? Conference Board is a global independent research and membership organization working in the public interest. It was actually founded over almost 100 years ago, probably known as the steward of the U.S. leading economic indicators, but really the global aspect of the organization is now like totally paramount, reflecting its members, which are many of which are multinational corporations. We have offices all over the world, and although the headquarters are still in New York, it's not the center of things necessarily. So the research program centers on economic measurement and the analysis of comparative performance, and one of the core sort of capabilities we have is the comparative study of productivity, technology, and innovation. It's probably pretty obvious why members of the Conference Board would be interested in that, and it's also obviously a vital topic for policy analysis. So one of the products that we have is publicly accessible, publicly available because it was developed in part from public funds, is something called the Total Economy Database. It contains data on productivity performance. It covers 123 countries, or 99% of the world's GDP. Includes data on GDP, employment, hours, labor productivity from 1950 on. There's a lot of data in there on unit labor costs from manufacturing as well. And recognizing that decision makers, both in business and in public policy, need timely information. The current year is estimated or projected. It's updated twice a year and forms the basis of a lot of the analysis that many international think tanks use. A rather exciting development is that we also have data on sources of growth for total factor productivity from 1980 on. So this would include not only, given labor productivity, what is the contribution to labor productivity of capital, of energy, of, intermediate services. All that stuff is out there. And this is a product of across-Atlantic partnerships. I won't go over the details shown on this slide, but if you look at a few of them, you might see the footprint of our chief economist, Bart van Ark, who's a Dutch national, and the first non-American chief economist of the Conference Board. And the Sources of Growth module that we recently released with great fanfare, again, is this product of an EU framework program and work done at Harvard University. But now to the main message here. Along with some researchers in the European Union, we've been running a project to measure intangible investment and capital in 12 European countries. So what is this all about? Well, first of all, going back to comparative economic performance, sort of a well-known comparative economic result is that traditional measures of capital really explain very little of the cross-country differences in living standards. There's different ways you can go with that fact, but one, and I'm going to talk about one of them, and that is that traditional capital estimates are understated because many of the inputs to innovation are not counted for what they are, which are investments in the future. There's an often quoted sentence from a paper that I wrote that is really just basic Econ 101, which is that any use of resources today designed to increase the productive capacity of a firm in the future is investment. If you consume something today, that's consumption. If you're spending it on something because it's going to get you more consumption in the future, that's investment. But our macroeconomic data don't reflect that reality. And I'm going to be talking about the way business activity is portrayed because I want to get to the heart of this through innovation. So if you were to implement this sort of economic view of investment, it would modernize the portrayal of business activity in national accounting systems, and it would provide policymakers with a better tool for analysis. I came to work on this topic while at the Federal Reserve in the late 90s, the turn of the millennium, thinking about we always look at investment in IT as an indicator of innovative activity. Why do we do that? Well, we were macroeconomists then. It's right there in the national accounts, and you didn't have to go around digging around for something obscure. And it seemed like it was pretty good. But, if you think about the structure of the economy, what was happening, and what the breadth of that activity may be, it seemed like it just, in your gut, that it would be a little bit limited. Besides, there was a whole body of microeconomic empirical evidence coming out suggesting that the range of activities led to increased productivity performance in firms, not just the traditional measures of investment. So, if Apple comes out with a new product like the iPod, it spent, by some people's estimates, $800 million designing and investing in that new product before it's launched. It's made, a return many times over. But all of that money, the money that they would have spent on the design, on the branding of that product, that wasn't counted as investment. That would have just been SG&A in their accounts. So again, just to drive home this point, when firms commit to innovation, the evidence of that commitment is an allocation of resources to developing and implementing new products, new distribution processes, new methods for selling and making and organizing their practices. I didn't make up this list. This comes from the Oslo Manual, which is the guide for the European innovation surveys. It's very close to the economic view of, if you were to collect spending data on these items, it would get you very close to the economic view of macroeconomic investment in the work that I did. One of the reasons why our work really took off and why it gained such interest in Europe is that we offered a scheme for measuring intangible investment. I don't want to go through it. It had 3 broad categories. It had 9 different types of investments. It recognized that there were different types of capital, some of which had a legal basis, some of which did not. But there were just these broad themes. Inputs to innovation include more than ICT, and tangible investments include more than R&D. What you guys have been talking about in the energy area, the valley of death, the demonstration projects, it seems really obvious to you, but that's not in R&D. Anything like that isn't in R&D. It wouldn't be there if we were talking about what it takes to launch a new car. All that testing that goes on, that's not R&D because it's not science. So we implemented this scheme, and here's 60 years of history that's been estimated about the different investment rates in tangible versus intangible capital. And you can see when you look over a broad period of time, again, I don't have time to tell the story behind all the little bumps in the trends, but there's been some structural change in the economy, in the way in which businesses set aside money to increase their future capacity, and it's been towards intangibles. And guess what? After the work on co-invest, we find that some other countries spend more on intangibles than they do on tangibles, and many spend nearly that much. Across a whole range of countries shown here, this is just for 2006, I could show you many variations of this graph in levels and what have you. There is just a correlation between the level of productivity, between the level of per capita income, and the amount of the amount of intangible investment versus tangible investment. It's one of these growth phenomena that one of our earlier speakers was talking about. Of course, there's differences across countries. I don't want to spend a whole lot of time going into details, but some of them are interesting. I mean, you can see here Germany has a very large amount of its intangible investment devoted to innovative property. Innovative property in Germany is largely R&D assets. You can see that's also true in the United States. A very large fraction of intangible investment is devoted to investments in innovative property. But in the United States, more of it is it's less tilted towards traditional R&D assets. So you can tell stories of all the different countries, but again, I like to think about what's salient. What's salient is that the contribution of intangible assets to the growth in labor productivity is substantial. In the United States, it's nearly 1/4. It's also true in France. What I'm showing you here is the percentage point contribution of intangible assets to the growth in labor productivity. That's the scale here. And then the actual number is the average productivity growth rate. One can conclude from this, as did the OECD in a recent innovation strategy report, that intangible investments may be a key. At least we need to understand them in terms of understanding how to support innovation and productivity growth in the years ahead. Because clearly, if you add two things together, multi-factor productivity, the measure of our ignorance, what's left over after we explain all the factors of production, plus the intangible capital, you add those things together, then you've got 3/4 of labor productivity explained. So so innovation explains the growth in labor productivity, and at least by capitalizing investments in intangibles, we get part of the way towards sort of seeing what's going on. We're lifting some of what Moses Abramovitz famously called the measure of our ignorance. We're lifting it out of the residual and putting it into capital investment, and thereby better depicting the trends and patterns in economic growth. And that's really what this is all about. And so where should one sort of go from here? I wrote down these two notes, and as I was looking at my notes before coming up here, I realized I had wanted to change the slide because I started in my initial thinking and said, well, let's see what the next step should be in the analysis of intangibles, and then what does the science and innovation policy community need? In the end, I came up with a list that doesn't really distinguish between these two because I think it's important to bring to you, the science and innovation policy community, this framework, and I want to just tell you why it could be important for you to sort of wrap your head around it a little bit. So, number one, now this may not be in the right order, but I think I put something at the top that seems to be under the radar screen of many people that I rub shoulders with in the science policy community. But let me start at the beginning. We need higher quality data. Policymakers need higher quality data on intangible capital. Okay, I say one here because there's two slides with the same theme. Higher quality data are needed. If you go through that list of intangible assets, we've got good data on R&D. I'm not talking about R&D. We've got pretty good data on software. I'm not talking about that. But that maybe accounts for a little bit less than half of at least what I estimate intangible investment to be. This work has really caught on, and several years ago, let me not go through the story because that gets us back to how GDP gets determined, and you probably in this audience aren't really interested in that. But the bottom line is, between 2013 and 2014, if the advanced countries follow the international guidelines, and the main EU countries and the U.S. will, R&D will be capitalized as investment. It will be included in GDP. You guys, you got to wrap your head around that. There will be quarterly numbers on it. There's going to be everybody analyzing where is investments in science going. I mean, this is good, but it's not going to be the back page of a budget. It's not going to be just in the Office of Science Policy. Like every macroeconomic forecaster, the CBO, the Federal Reserve, they're going to take into account what this means for their assessments of potential output and the capacity of the economy, and that is what determines the overall macroeconomic policy. This is important. And then I say here, well, what price deflator should be used? I mean, we've had this sort of placeholder forever that was just in the science policy community of dividing by the GDP deflator. It makes sense. But the weight of evidence isn't going that direction. The weight of evidence is going to work to an approach that will try to account for we'll try to take into account the productivity of the R&D process. Think about that. If you think the productivity of the R&D process has increased disproportionately relative to the rest of the economy, then it's not going to follow the GDP deflator. in some work that I did, again, branded under this co-invest project supported by the EU Framework Program, did this with some folks at the Office of National, who work with the Office of National Statistics in the UK. They're university professors as well. We tried to, we took the literature on R&D productivity seriously, some of which was summarized, by the way, in the background paper for this conference. Calculated a price index. We developed a method to calculate a price index that would be consistent with an estimate of productivity. And when we took that to the data, for instance, we found out in the UK that it would have fallen 5% per year on average between 1981 and 2005. Well, I mean, I think they wouldn't have been, wringing their hands and wrenching their hands about, oh my God, we don't invest enough in R&D quite as much if they were looking at something with a price deflator that was falling 5% a year instead of in the UK rising more like 3 or 4 because their inflation rate is higher there than it is here. So I think this is something you folks need to think about. Then there is, of course, the Intangible Investment Framework, which says there's more to innovation than R&D, which everybody knows that was the subject of much of the discussion about energy today. So it will set R&D and patents, the historic sort of focus of science policy, in a macroeconomic context. They're not going to look real big unless it's estimated that they have a lot of productivity, which they do, and therefore their real growth will be high in that sense. The dollars and cents will be less than some of the other components of intangibles that we've estimated. And once the patterns of all the intangibles get sort of filled in, then you're going to sort of see, what's happening to the basic research as captured by R&D or the applied research as captured by R&D, relative to, let's just call the rest of intangibles, just for the sake of argument, sort of the commercialization part of science. We're going to go out and really capture what businesses are doing to either take something for their own R&D lab and make money from it, or take some freely available piece of knowledge or an idea and turn it into a commercial product. That's what this series, what this investment is going to show, if it's measured correctly, and that's going to elevate to the macroeconomic level what innovative activity is doing in real time. In order for all of that to get in the national accounts, again, in a few years, R&D is going to be there. We need to have better measures of some of the other intangible investments, and their research. There's a lot of research going on to measure intangible investments more accurately. Let me just sort of say that. And then finally, we need to further develop the microdata sort of evidence base, and that's being done with here in the U.S. by several projects that have been funded by the NSF. One on management practices that follows up on some of the work that was out there at the time we did our original work. There's a grant that I'm part of that is looking at the role of financial services, and I think we need to pay a lot more attention to public intangibles. So, in conclusion, while the Intangibles framework provides macro aggregates useful for public dissemination, and that's a huge step in the direction of shining a very bright light of day on what's of great interest to everybody in this room. It's just a framework, and it's just some broad numbers. It doesn't provide the answers to many topics that are important for understanding the dynamics of the marketplace for ideas and innovation. I've listed just some topics there. I think those are the sorts of things that, that's like where I think you guys should go, in addition to thinking about this sort of broader framework. And this broader framework of intangibles does help you prioritize, some of these individual topics that I think, we collectively know we need to continue to work on. So that was just to explain that last point. I don't want to take any more time. So thank you. And if you want any references to some of the work that I referred to in passing, send me an email, and I'd be happy to send them to you. Thank you.